And welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Talent. This is the show where we sit down with some of the experts and we discuss a variety of topics around talent optimization. Now, today I'm super excited because I'm joined by Dr. Siminovsky. She's our lead scientist here at the Predictive Index. Ali, thanks for stepping outside the lab and coming to chat with us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Now, Ali, I can't think of a better person to discuss today's topic with, because today our topic is all around the science behind successful teams. Now, let's start with an obvious but a very large one. Why does science even matter when we're thinking about teams?
Why does science matter when we're talking about teams? No, I'm just kidding. We've been studying individual differences for well over a century. And by applying science to it, we've learned a lot more about individuals' personalities and their relationships, as well as what I do as an industrial psychologist, look at people at work. And research about teams has also appeared over the past century, but it's definitely become really popular over the past 2 decades. And I'd say even within the last decade, extra popular. There are entire academic journals just dedicated to studies about teams. And it's become so specialized that I'd say if you had a question about teams, someone's probably looked into it already or is in the process of researching it. So in the same way that organizational science has helped us understand individuals at work and what motivates them and what predicts good performance, we could do the same with teams for groups of people. And what's important to note, and this is part of why science plays such a big role here, we're not just looking at aggregates of individuals. We're not just averaging data over a bunch of individuals and applying it to a team. We're looking at the dynamic interactions between people. We're looking at the interactions between teams and their environments. There's a methodology called social network analysis that is gaining extreme popularity in the study of teams, in that it allows us to see connections and linkages between people.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
And knowing science is important, and all of the things that you just mentioned, that's great. But what's the actual step to take that into action? How can people be more mindful about being objective when building or working with teams?
Yes, so objectivity, any industrial psychologist would tell you, is important. And the way we get to objectivity is through measurement and data. So the practice of talent optimization really promotes the importance of measuring and constantly diagnosing on the individual and organizational level, but it's important not to forget about teams. And in my experience, I've seen a lot of measures of team productivity and effectiveness, but I've seldom seen them actually acted upon. So, Josh, even speaking from your own experience, a lot of teams have KPIs that they're supposed to meet.
Right.
And if you meet them, it's a check. If you don't meet them, we didn't meet them, here's the reason why. And that's it. Nothing's really done with that. So it's important to do frequent and novel and really actionable diagnostic measurements, as they're going to provide a lot more information as to inter and intra-team functioning.
And can you just elaborate a little bit on what exactly you mean by those measures? What are some good examples of actionable diagnostic measures?
Sure. So I know on many available engagement surveys, there are questions about teams. I'd say get really nitty gritty there. My team is effective. I'm happy with my team. My team accomplishes our goals effectively. Use those, set an organizational benchmark and see how different teams stack up there, and let those teams that are performing more strongly on those items provide some coaching to those who aren't. And, coaching is not just necessarily one-on-one. So
Right.
That's a way to do it. Those could also be pulse surveys, so sent out, every so often and checked upon. Something that I thought of, and I don't know that this was my idea, it's just something that came into my mind and I haven't heard of it. But doing sort of a team 360, so finding stakeholders that work with the overall team frequently and asking questions as to their performance and looking at that, again, as a whole team.
Right. I think that makes sense. Now, one of the things that you learn here at PI is there are so many unique factors. There's so many things that make up a person. We're very unique individuals, and it's hard to really balance how do you deal with each specific person if they're so different. So that being said, do you think there are some people who are just better at being part of a team? And if so, what should those managers, those leaders, what should we be looking for?
So, as a quick overall, I do think there are some people that are better suited to working collaboratively with others.
Hmm.
And I think anyone who's worked or even done a group project in school can speak to that. There are people you prefer to work with. But with that being said, what is good on a certain team is definitely going to depend. So I could think of very few job descriptions that I've seen, whether internally at a company I was working for or when applying for jobs, that don't mention something about being a strong team player.
Right.
And honestly, that doesn't really mean anything without any context there. A good team player on the science team that I'm on might look very different than what a good team player looks like on the digital learning team, which you're on. And that could
Right.
also differ from organization to organization. So I think it's important when designing jobs to think about, what do we mean here? What's a good team player in this context? Is it someone who's very collaborative? Is it someone who goes out of their way to help people without being asked? Is it someone who has a really positive mood? Is it someone who just says yes and keeps their head down and does their work? It's going to look really different from team to team. And in order to define what a successful team is, you need to define what is success on this team. You can't expect someone to be a strong team player if they don't know what a strong team player looks like in that context.
That's very true. And when you're thinking about that, so kind of that same point of having to consider all of the different styles or types that you're looking for, especially with these people and the roles they'll play on a team, there seems to be a lot of variables out there. And it's hard, I would imagine, but is there a best type of team when it comes to results for your organization? And if so, how do you find that out? What do you look for?
So this is also going to be an it depends answer, unfortunately.
Darn you,
Uh,
science.
so myself and Dr. Austin Fossey, who's our director of assessment research, conducted a study using, I think, tens of thousands of data points of PI's behavioral assessment last year to look at empirically what types of teams exist out there behaviorally. And we identified 9 different types of teams. And what we can say is that the type of team that is best is going to depend on the strategy or task at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's commonly assumed when you see a team that's very heads down, competitive, get the job done, has a strong presence, has a lot of productivity by whatever metric you're looking at there, we could say that's a strong team. That's the team that I want to have working for me. But when we carefully design our strategies and our tasks and agree upon them and consider what's really needed for this to be successful, we can better identify the team behavioral makeup that's uniquely suited to accomplish that goal.
That makes sense. Are there any ways that you can, I guess, examples or good examples of what kind of behaviors you might want to look for depending on your strategy, what that might feel like for a leader in an organization?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, you want to consider a group of people depending on the types of conflicts they're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I could talk about this a bit later, but basically, if they're people that just aren't going to get along fundamentally, that's probably not going to be a very successful team.
Right.
Furthermore, you want to look at people that know how to work independently, that can make a decision if that's a requirement of the job, but also people that know when it's time to say, I need to consult with other people on this. I want to work with some others. And furthermore, I mean, I hate to say good team player because I know I just said I don't like that term, but really people who we know are going to want to cooperate, want to be active, want to share their strengths with others, and are willing to both build on their weaknesses and figure out, exploit's not the right word, but exploit opportunities for where they have weaknesses that they know they could work with another person to fill in those gaps, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah. So some form of self-awareness.
Yes, self-awareness, I think, is crucial in general, and certainly when working on a team.
Right. Now, and I'm glad you mentioned some of those points because one of them was around managing those teams that kind of butt heads. So we talked a little bit about this on our last episode, but are there any ways that science can explain conflict and how to better manage it?
Sure. So there are a lot of theories of conflict and conflict resolution. What I think is most pervasive is the idea of task-based, relationship-based, and process-based conflict. So relationship-oriented conflict has to do with two people just not getting along. That's pretty typical interpersonal conflict. Task-based conflict has to do with people disagreeing about either the task at hand or what the desired outcomes are going to be. And then process-oriented conflict has to do with disagreement over the process for getting the work done.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different drawbacks to each of these types of conflicts. What has been found repeatedly in research is that in certain situations, some types of conflict can actually be constructive, particularly task-based and process-based. So if you think back to a large group project that you've been on, perhaps something cross-functional, so people with different experiences and backgrounds and academic backgrounds, you have a lot of different perspectives on how to tackle the same thing.
Right.
And oftentimes that results in something great because everyone's thinking about something that might not have been thinking of otherwise. So different studies have examined these different types of conflicts, what types of conflict resolution processes should be brought in, as well as should they be brought in at all. And a 2009 longitudinal study of university students working together in different research groups found that a high level of conflict management, so really getting in there, addressing it, and getting involved, neutralized some of the negative effects that we might commonly associate with relationship-oriented conflict. And no one enjoys those. So the fact that there is something we could do, I think is great news.
Right.
And in terms of conflict actually boosting a team's performance or engagement or cohesion, that depends on many, many factors. So there's no clear-cut answer as to when is conflict good. But there's been research even outside of organizational science around how to confront conflict most effectively and how to deal with it best. And in the clinical psychological research, there's a lot about this. And it's interesting, there's been a lot of talk about performance management and how to address poor performance or performance issues. And it's really quite similar as to how to explain conflict within teams. So it's universally agreed upon, conflict should generally be addressed directly and tactfully. Mm-hmm. I think we could all agree we know it's best if we take some time to cool off before jumping into something that's a conflict instead of yelling and getting angry. But it's really helpful to focus on the problem at hand as objectively as possible, keeping emotions out of it, using I terms, or in the case of two teams in conflict with one another, we terms. And what's really crucial is avoiding assigning blame to anyone or their intentions. Something I've heard a lot at PI is assume best intentions. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something safe to assume within team conflict as well. Don't assume someone's being malicious. There's probably a good reason why they did what they did or said what they said. And my general guidance around resolving team conflict, again, is the same as with performance management. If we allow it to fester and become a really big problem and a really big nuisance, it's going to become incredibly unpleasant to mediate there. If it's addressed quickly and directly when it's not quite as big of a deal yet, we're probably going to find more success.
Right. I think that makes sense. And I really like that point of teams, butting heads, as I mentioned before, but coming out with a better result, because I think that that's happened to me in many of the projects I work with. For my role specifically, I generally will always have SMEs or various other parties who are stakeholders in this and have a say. And a lot of it can get at times very frustrating. But at the end, it's for, you have to take that step back and say, well, it's all for the project. It's all for this deliverable. It's for the good of whatever we're trying to push off. And it's not about attacking one another. It's about realizing that, okay, we're a team. We're trying to have this better mission of building XYZ, whatever that might be.
And it's important to remember, there's nothing we can or should do to completely eliminate conflict. Even the best functioning, most productive, most engaged team where everyone loves each other is going to have conflict. And that's okay. And that's to be expected. It's a matter of dealing with it in an effective manner.
Right. I think that totally makes sense. Now, before we wrap this up, though, we've talked a lot about the team members themselves and
Mhm.
That's great. We need to be self-aware, as we mentioned, but what can management and leaders learn from science to better lead these individuals and teams?
Okay, a couple of things here. One, and I think this applies to everything at organizations, but especially teams, never stop measuring. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of focus is put on measuring individual and organization level outcomes. And even though we sometimes collect team metrics, they're seldom acted upon. So I would encourage organizations to really consider teams as mini organizations or as macro individuals, whichever is easier to think of, and really start measuring more and measuring in a way that is actionable, that you can actually do something with the outcomes that you find. Second, when we think of designing or redesigning an organization, it's important to consider the roles teams play. So, what teams do we need? What structure should they take? What's going to allow Team X have really easy access to Team Y if they need such access? What kind of structure is going to let these teams have the resources they need or get them the most easily? And I think when organizations are often designed, we forget to think about interactions between teams and the team dynamics themselves. And it's important to really think about what exactly is this team going to be doing? Who is best suited to be on that team? Who can stretch and adjust to be fulfilling those teams' goals?
Right.
And what teams need easier access to one another? Another piece of advice, consider all the factors that are at play when it comes to conflict. That's both within and outside the team. I think something that organizations often neglect when thinking about teams is not just the dynamics within the team, but those between teams. And that could make a really big difference when you start to think about it. And finally, don't forget to apply those engagement survey findings at the team level, not just the organization level or the department level. Equip all employees on how to act on engagement survey findings. A lot of times they're tied to the team's manager and that's it. And that's not really going to be effective. The team should know the team is responsible for the overall team's engagement. I said team a lot there, but I guess that's what we're talking about. That's fine. Individuals should know or be educated on or go through workshops on how they can act in order to improve team level outcomes.
Awesome. Ali, this has been great. It's always really super nice to get that insight from the actual science rather than just gut feeling, because what would be the point if we didn't look at this objectively? Thank you so much. Once again, this has been awesome. Thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you. This has been awesome for me too.